The gunshot came from inside the cabin he had just bought. Cole Sutter had not even unlocked the front door yet. He was still standing on the porch, keys in hand, a moving truck idling behind him in the gravel drive, when the sound cracked through the mountain silence like the sky itself had split open. Birds scattered from the pines. His horse, tied to the fence 20 yards back, reared and screamed. He didn't think. He kicked the door in. And there, in the dim light of a cabin he had purchased online without ever setting foot inside, stood a woman he had never seen before, barefoot, blood on her hands, a pistol shaking in her grip, and eyes that told him she had been running for a very long time. "Don't come any closer," she whispered. "Please. You don't know what you just walked into." He didn't. Not yet. But by the time the sun set that night, Cole Sutter would know more about danger, about loyalty, and about the kind of love that asks a man to risk everything than he had learned in 34 years of quiet, careful living. This is the story of that cabin, that woman, and the secret that nearly got them both killed, and the love that, against every reasonable instinct, refused to let go. 3 weeks earlier, Cole Sutter had been a man who did not believe in impulsive decisions. He ran 400 head of cattle on land his grandfather had cleared by hand. He balanced his books every Sunday night with a pencil and a cup of black coffee, and he had not taken a vacation, a risk, or a leap of faith since his wife Rebecca died 2 years before. Thrown from a spooked horse on a trail, he had ridden with her 100 times. Grief had made Cole careful in a way that bordered on paralysis. He fixed fences that didn't need fixing. He fed cattle that were already fed. He filled every hour of daylight so that the silence of the ranch house at night would have less of him left to swallow. His sister Dana told him, more than once, that a man could not outwork a broken heart. Cole told her, more than once, that he wasn't trying to. He was just trying to get through Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and then the Wednesday after that. So when he saw the listing, a hunting cabin 2 hours into the high country, 40 acres of untouched timber, a running creek, and a price so low it seemed like a typo, something in him, some small stubborn ember he thought grief had put out completely, told him to buy it without asking questions. No inspection, no walkthrough. He wired the money before he let himself think better of it. And for the first time in 2 years, Cole Sutter felt something that was not quite grief and not quite hope, but sat somewhere lonely in between. His sister called it reckless. His accountant called it insane. Cole called it the first decision he'd made in 2 years that belonged only to him. He told himself the cabin would be empty. Boarded up, maybe a family of raccoons in the attic, a leaking roof he'd have to deal with before winter. What he did not expect, what no listing photo or property disclosure had prepared him for, was a woman. Her name, he would learn only hours later, was Josephine Hale. Though for most of the past year, she had gone by no name at all, moving from town to town, cabin to cabin, staying only as long as it took for a place to start feeling like it might be found. She had broken into the cabin 9 days earlier, when it still belonged to a bank and no one, she believed, would come looking. She had been wrong. When Cole kicked the door open that first afternoon, gun drawn only in her own trembling hands, never his, because Cole Sutter did not own a handgun and had not fired a rifle since the ranch's last mountain lion trouble 2 winters back, what he found was not a threat. It was a 28-year-old woman with a fading bruise along her jaw, a stitched cut above her eyebrow that she had clearly sewn herself with fishing line, and a look in her eyes that Cole recognized immediately, because he had worn that same look in every mirror he'd passed for the last 2 years. It was the look of someone who had been alone with something terrible for far too long. The gunshot, it turned out, had not been aimed at him. She had fired at a rattlesnake that had slithered through a gap in the cabin's floorboards, startled by the sound of his truck in the drive. Cole would later tell Dana that it was the single strangest, most humbling moment of his life, standing in a doorway he had just broken, staring at a stranger who had just saved him from a snakebite, while looking more terrified of him than of the snake. "I'm not going to hurt you," Cole said, lowering his hands slowly, the way he might approach a spooked colt. I own this place. I bought it a few weeks back. I didn't know anyone was staying here. Nobody's supposed to know I'm anywhere," Josephine said, and her voice cracked on the word anywhere in a way that told Cole this was not the performance of a desperate liar, but the exhaustion of someone who had been telling the truth to no one for a very long time. He could have called the sheriff right then. Later, When he replayed the moment in his mind, he understood that this was the fork in the road, the single choice that decided everything that followed. A more careful man, the man he had been for 2 years, would have backed out of the cabin, driven the 2 hours home, and let the county handle a trespasser with a gun. But something about the way she stood between him and the door, not to threaten him, but to protect the small satchel of belongings behind her, made Cole ask a different question instead. Who are you running from? Josephine's answer took 3 days to fully arrive, and it came in pieces, the way truth does when a person has learned that telling too much too fast gets people killed. What Cole pieced together, over meals she was too proud to call charity and too hungry to refuse, was this. Josephine Hale had been an accountant, a good one, meticulous, the kind who noticed decimal points other people missed, for a logistics company that turned out to be laundering money for a man named Victor Ames, a name that made the local sheriff's deputies go quiet whenever it came up. Because Ames had friends in courthouses 2 counties over and had never once been convicted of anything, despite 3 separate investigations that had all mysteriously stalled. Josephine had found the discrepancy 11 months earlier, a shipping manifest that didn't match a bank transfer, that didn't match a name, that didn't match anything in the public record. She had done what any careful person would do. She had made copies. And 2 nights later, her apartment had been broken into, her laptop stolen, and a message left for her in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. A single bullet on her kitchen counter and nothing else. She had run that same night. She had been running for 11 months since. I don't need you to believe me, she told Cole on the 3rd night, sitting across from him at a fire he'd built more for the company than the cold. I need you to understand that every day I stay somewhere, I put whoever lives there in danger. That's not a threat. It's just true. I should already be gone. Then why aren't you? Cole asked. Josephine looked at the fire for a long time before she answered. Because I'm so tired, Cole. I'm so tired of being alone with this. It was the first time she'd said his name, and something about the way it landed, careful, almost reverent, like she was testing whether she was even allowed to say it, undid something in Cole that 2 years of solitude had wound tight. He thought of Rebecca, of the last honest conversation they'd had before the accident, about how grief and fear were cousins, both of them convincing a person that safety meant staying small. He thought about the cabin he'd bought without asking a single practical question, and he understood, for the first time, why he'd done it. He had been so tired of being alone with his own grief that some part of him had reached blindly for anything that might not be able to hurt him worse than he already hurt. He hadn't expected it to reach back. The following 2 weeks were not simple. Cole drove back and forth between his ranch and the cabin, telling Dana only that he was doing repairs, a lie that curdled a little more every time he told it, because Dana had always been able to read him the way their late mother used to read weather in a cloud bank. He brought Josephine groceries, a second-hand laptop with cash from an ATM 2 towns over so it couldn't be traced, a phone with no account tied to her name. He watched her hands, steady, precise, an accountant's hands even now, rebuild a case against Victor Ames from memory, page by page, late into the night, while the fire burned low and the mountain wind pressed against the windows like something patient and listening. He watched her flinch at every unfamiliar engine sound on the county road below. He watched her sleep, when she slept at all, with one hand curled near the pistol she kept under her pillow, and he understood that this was not a woman who had chosen fear as a personality. This was a woman who had been taught, by hard and repeated experience, that fear was the only thing standing between her and a bullet on a kitchen counter that would not be a warning the second time. And somewhere in those 2 weeks, between the wood splitting and the shared meals and the long, careful conversations that circled her secret without ever quite naming Cole's growing feelings for her, Cole Sutter fell in love with a woman he had known for less time than most people take to choose a restaurant for a second date. He didn't tell her. Not yet. Some part of him, the careful, grief-tempered part, knew that a man does not build a future on a woman's terror. But another part of him, the part that had bought a cabin site unseen on a gut feeling he couldn't explain, understood that some things arrive before you're ready for them, and the only real choice you have is whether to run from what's arrived, or to stand still and let it in. He chose to stand still. He did not yet know that Victor Ames's men had already traced a laptop purchase, 2 towns over, cash only, to a rancher named Cole Sutter. And that by the time Chapter 2 began, the quiet mountain silence that had sheltered them both would be the very thing that made them so easy to find. The truck came up the county road just after 10 at night, headlights off, engine low in a way that told Cole, a man who had spent his whole life listening to the sounds cattle made when something was wrong in the dark, that whoever was driving it did not want to be heard. He was outside checking on his horse when he saw it, a shape moving too slow and too deliberate through the tree line, half a mile below the cabin. His stomach dropped the way it had the day the ranch foreman had come to tell him about Rebecca. Some part of a person, he had learned, always knows before the rest of them catches up. He ran back inside. Josephine was already awake, already at the window, already holding the pistol with a steadiness that told Cole this was not the first time she'd had to move fast in the dark. "They found the laptop," she said, and her voice had gone flat in a way that frightened him more than panic would have. "I told you cash wasn't enough. Ames has people in county records, in phone companies, everywhere money moves, he can see it." "How many?" Cole asked. "With Ames, never fewer than 3. She was already pulling on boots, already sweeping the case files into the satchel she'd kept packed and ready since the day he'd met her, a detail he understood now, with sudden and painful clarity, as the saddest kind of preparation, a life lived permanently ready to leave. "You need to go? Right now? Take your truck, drive to the sheriff, and tell them you don't know me. That's the only version of tonight where you walk away from this. I'm not leaving you here." "Cole, I'm not leaving you here," he said again, and something in the flat certainty of it silenced her mid-argument, because in 3 weeks she had learned that Cole Sutter was a man who said very little, but never said anything he didn't mean completely. What followed was the longest hour of Cole's life. They killed the cabin's lights and moved by memory through rooms he barely knew yet, out the back toward the tree line and the horse he'd left saddled from the evening ride, an old habit of a rancher who never fully trusted a night to stay quiet. Josephine moved like someone who had rehearsed running in her mind 1,000 times and never once believed she'd have someone beside her doing it too. Cole moved like a man discovering, with something between terror and clarity, that he would rather die on this mountain than let this woman disappear into it alone the way she'd been disappearing for 11 months already. They didn't make it to the horse before the first flashlight beam cut through the trees. "Sutter," a voice called out, almost friendly, almost reasonable, the practiced calm of a man used to finding people who didn't want to be found. "Nobody needs to get hurt tonight. We just want the girl and what she's carrying. You give us that, you go back to your cattle, and none of this ever touches you." Cole felt Josephine's hand find his in the dark, not for comfort, he understood, but as a silent goodbye, an offering, her body already angling to step out from behind the tree line and trade herself for his safety the way she'd clearly decided, in the space of a heartbeat, that she would trade herself for anyone's safety if it came to that. It was, Cole thought later, the most purely good instinct he had ever witnessed in another human being, and it was also the thing he would not allow. He held her hand tighter and did not let her move. "She's not carrying anything," Cole called back, his voice steadier than he felt, the flat, unhurried cadence of a rancher who had learned long ago that panic spooked animals and men in exactly the same way. "Already sent copies to the county attorney 2 towns over, by mail, 3 days ago. You touch either one of us, that's the version of events that gets read into a courtroom by Friday." It was a lie. It was the only lie Cole had ever told with his whole chest. And it was, he would understand only in hindsight, the exact kind of lie that a desperate, half-formed plan sometimes needs to survive, because Victor Ames's men had not been sent to kill without complication, only to retrieve and to frighten, and the sudden, unplanned-for possibility that the evidence was already beyond their reach changed the calculus of the entire night. There was a long silence in the dark, the particular silence of men recalculating risk, and then the flashlight beam swung away, and the low idle of the truck engine reversed slowly back down the county road, unwilling to gamble a federal case on a bluff they couldn't be sure was won. Cole and Josephine did not move for 11 minutes. He counted every one of them. What came after was not the neat resolution of a story that ends the moment danger passes. It took another 6 weeks. Cole driving Josephine to the county attorney's office himself the very next morning, staying in the waiting room the entire 4 hours she was interviewed, because she had asked him to, quietly, in a voice that still expected to be told no. It took federal investigators, once they saw what her meticulous accountant's eye had documented, moving with a speed that surprised even them, because it turned out Josephine Hale had not just found evidence of Victor Ames's crimes. She had built, alone, in fear, in 11 months of running, one of the most complete financial cases against organized laundering that anyone in that field office had seen in a decade. Ames was arrested on a Tuesday morning outside a courthouse 2 counties over, the same courthouse that had let him walk 3 times before, and this time there was no one left to make it go quietly away. Josephine testified in March. Cole sat behind her every day of it, in a suit he'd had to borrow from his brother-in-law because he hadn't owned one since Rebecca's funeral, and when she stepped down from the stand on the final day, she did not look for her lawyer first, or the federal agents who had spent 6 weeks protecting her. She looked for him. He was there. He had been there every single day. He understood, watching her cross the courtroom toward him in front of everyone, that this was the answer to a question he had never let himself ask out loud: whether a man who had built 2 years of careful, grief-proofed walls around himself could ever let someone back in without those walls collapsing on him entirely. They hadn't collapsed. They had simply, quietly, opened. He asked her to stay that same night, not as a woman with nowhere else to go, but as a woman he wanted, plainly and without hedging, to build something with. She said yes before he'd even finished the sentence, and later she told him that she'd been waiting 3 weeks, 1 gunshot, and 1 impossible night on a mountainside to be asked. Josephine Hale moved to the ranch that spring. She kept her accountant's eye and put it to better use than she ever had at the company that nearly got her killed, taking over the ranch's books that Cole had been keeping, badly, in pencil, every lonely Sunday night for 2 years. Dana, who had once accused her brother of recklessness for buying a cabin sight unseen, told him at their wedding the following autumn that it was, without question, the smartest impulsive decision anyone in their family had ever made. Cole still owns the cabin. He never sold it, never rented it out, never let the memory of that first splintered doorframe fade into something he'd rather forget. Some Sundays, when the ranch work is done and the light goes long and gold over the timber, he and Josephine drive up together, just the 2 of them, and sit on the porch where a broken door once let a frightened man become something braver than he knew he had left in him. He learned, that year, the thing grief had almost convinced him wasn't true, that the same broken places in a person that make them careful, that make them afraid to reach for anything again, are exactly the places capable of the deepest kind of loving, once someone finally proves brave enough to reach back. Safety, he came to believe, was never about building walls high enough that nothing could get in. It was about becoming the kind of person willing to open a door, even one you have every reason to fear, because on the other side of it might be the very thing your life has been quietly, patiently waiting for.